So please welcome ISU alumni, Mr. Dave Brant.
Thank you, Travis. Thank you, Travis. Dr. Woods, thanks for having me back. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to make this a very intimate discussion. So hopefully as we get warmed up, you guys will hit me with some questions. A pleasure to be back here. Just to give you some perspective, I graduated with a master's in criminology from Indiana State in hold on to your chairs, 75. I don't think most of you can relate to that. So maybe a couple of you, your parents anyway. So 43 years later, I think that's about right, I'm very happy to be back and share with you some of my history, how it relates to hopefully where some of you think you might be going, and how I can help you in this next few minutes, give you some insights about where I went from here and where I am today. The good thing about, you probably notice this with your parents and family and older friends, as you get older, one of the biggest thrills in life is you talk about yourself a lot. And because you're older, nobody interrupts you. They just kind of let you talk, and they zone out about halfway through and don't really know what you're talking about and don't really care. So I'm going to test you on that this morning. I'm going to talk a lot about myself, but I hope it's relevant to where you are and some of the things you're thinking about. And I hope you will take advantage of my history and ask any questions that you may have. So first of all, I'm going to pitch you. I know you're on college budgets, but you got to help me out. I'm at the other end of the extreme. Senior citizen, retired, living on, hopefully retirement salary, this, that, and the other. So I'm going to pitch you for some donor support. And this is the form that's coming in. How many of you have actually seen NCIS, the TV show? Okay. So I was the director of NCIS when the show started. I had a lot of involvement in terms of actually coordinating and approving through the Department of Defense how the thing was going to be shaped. It was going to be a good versus bad kind of story. As head of the agency, I was kind of nervous about how it would make our agency look and how we would be portrayed, et cetera, et cetera. It was a fascinating, unlikely experience for me, for my career. But tying to what I said at the start, in November 2005, this is important, you're used to taking notes, November 2005, there's an episode of NCIS, Frame Up. I'm in it. And I have one line, and I'm getting ready to retire as director of NCIS. And Mark Harmon and Jethro Gibbs and I are walking down a hallway, and he says to me, Dave Brant, I hear you're retiring. My response, I like to refer to it as a lateral move to the recreational sector, Jethro. That was $726 I got paid for that. Now, I couldn't accept the check because I was still in government service. However, today, which relates all the way back to what I need from you, every time you watch that episode, November 2005, Frame Up, I get a residual check. And it ranges from 23 cents to probably the high of about 89 cents. So once a month I get a check for like $1 to $2 to $3. So if this group all watches that, could be about a $3 check coming in for me in the next 30 to 60 days. So please go home this evening and take a look at that. Not only will it be exciting, but you'll help me in my retirement lifestyle. So thank you for that. All right, so I leave here. The chairman of the department at the time was Dr. Nardini. Dr. Shrink was here. I saw his name. Dr. Groskoff was here. I saw his name on the board. Those three individuals were part of the faculty for the criminology department when I left. I came here after getting an undergraduate degree in psychology from Bradley. I took 2 criminal justice classes in my senior year, and I was intrigued. Cop stories were hot at the time. I kind of felt like I wanted to get into criminal justice, but I didn't know what. I came here because there was a criminology department. And at the time, there were few, if any, in the country that you could readily assess because there was no internet, so you actually had to do research and go to a library or make phone calls, and you couldn't find out anything. And Michigan State, Florida State, I think Sam Houston may have had criminology programs, but Indiana State, having been a local guy who grew up in Southern Illinois, was an attractive opportunity and option for me because I wanted to go into criminal justice / criminology. Came here, got a master's, great program, small department, a lot of very, very hands-on interactions with a small group of students, and I learned a lot. I made a lot of good contacts. Dr. Nardini is the person who suggested, as I was leaving, that I contact this little-known agency at the time, Naval Investigative Service, Office of Naval Intelligence, and go talk to them. Had never heard of them before. He, as the chair of the department, gave me a card of an individual who was in Glenview, Illinois, near Chicago, and said, call this guy sometime. I go from here and I become a police officer in Miami, Florida. During the time I'm a police officer, I called the guy on the card. And I said, here's who I am. Dr. Nardini recommended I call you. Here's my history. I'm 24 years old. I'm a cop in Miami, but I'm interested in being a federal agent. What do I need to do? He said, come talk to me. Set up an interview. I came back to Chicago. I talked to him. He set up a screening board. They all said, you're too young. You don't know what you're doing. Go find your way in life and come back. So I stayed as a police officer for another year. I went back, and I was ultimately hired as a special agent with Naval Criminal Investigative Service in January 1977. I spent almost 30 years there. It's a phenomenal agency. It was an honor to be part of the agency and ultimately lead the agency. I did all categories of criminal investigation all over the world. I worked undercover for about a year, traveled extensively. Jumping forward, I was the head of counterintelligence from 94 to 97, and then I was the director from 97 to 2005. The reason I tell you that is that career, that portion of my career, literally originated here with Dr. Nardini. Had he not given me a card of an individual, of an organization that I'd never heard of, and had I not decided to follow that up and then pursue it, even after I had been turned down the first time, I wouldn't be standing here in front of you talking as I'm talking now. So the message there for any of you as you start to look around and decide where you go, whether it's law enforcement or analysis or corrections, is build a network and do not fail to take advantage of that network. Because the people that you can learn most from are those that you're working with, that you're taking classes from, and that you'll encounter. So I think the message that I always tell younger folks when they ask me how did I ever get to where I got to, you know, a lot of people are a lot smarter than I am. A lot of people have more technical skills than I did and do. But I always tried to listen and learn from others and then take advantage of that in feedback and apply it to my own objectives. So Indiana State, for me, 43 years ago, was the starting point of a career that I would have never predicted, and it really was aligning with some of the things I just said. You know, really listen to people, learn from people, and then act, and that's sort of one of my mottos. So I spend 30 years at NCIS. I was there during the TV show, which was a sort of a fun sideline. By the way, that show is now approaching the longest running television show in history, and it's sneaking up on Gunsmoke. It's into its 16th year, and I'm getting a lousy 29-cent check a month. So not bitter or anything. They just never called me back after that one appearance. I was head of NCIS. NCIS's real mission is criminal counterintelligence, counterterrorism, fraud, other aspects of security. It's like the FBI. It's like a combination of FBI, DEA, Secret Service, all the other three acronym agencies, federal, sort of a combination of all those. That mission applied to the Department of Defense, Department of the Navy, Marine Corps, Navy, and civilian employees. Phenomenal mission, unique mission, global mission. As head of counterintelligence, I've worked extensively with other intelligence agencies and some of the more unique spy cases in our history. When I was the director, as I started to say, on 12 October 2000 was the attack on Cole. 17 sailors were killed. Skiff with 2 individuals pulled up next to the ship, exploded. 2 guys killed themselves, blew a hole in the side of the ship, 17 sailors died. That was actually the start, really, of the War on Terror that many of you wouldn't have been around or were very young when that started, which was the precursor to the attack on 9/11. Some of those individuals involved in the attack on Cole were involved in the attacks on 9/11. So as head of an agency, although we're a small agency and we weren't primarily jurisdictionally leading those investigations, we were first on the scene in the attack on Cole. We did work jointly with the FBI to resolve that, and we were a key participant in all law enforcement, intel, counter-intel in the post-9/11 actions. And like all those agencies, every single organization involved in intel, law enforcement, counterterrorism transformed. We as an organization transformed during my tenure from somewhat of a reactive organization where we would respond to an event after it occurred, be it criminal, counterintelligence, counterterrorism, to very much a proactive, interrupt the action, if you will, organization. We were in literally hundreds of ports around the world trying to identify potential indicators of terrorist activity. We were aligned very closely with other intel and law enforcement organizations. And the reason I'm mentioning that, from a career perspective, during my tenure, I had opportunities to lead and be part of some exceptionally significant and impacting efforts that I would have never, ever thought possible when I left here in 1975. We were part of the interrogations at Gitmo. It's back in the news again a bit. When you start talking about torture, the current nominee for CIA is getting some publicity now based on her experience when she was at a different role in CIA. In my case, we had a team at Guantanamo Bay conducting interviews of those detained. I got involved in somewhat of a controversy in that I was going to pull our people out because of what I thought were improper practices, improper utilization of interview techniques. So I was if you want to use the term, an anti-torture advocate. Others disagreed. It still remains an issue today and will always be an issue. So I mention that again because from here, from my start here, if you will, I was able to lead an organization, work with counterparts that touched some of the major impacting events in our country's history in the last decade. And it was a real honor to do so. And I look back on those years fondly and very proud of what our organization did. So I'm going to move quickly because you may have some questions about NCIS. I won't dwell on anything specific. I left NCIS in January 2006. Between 2006 and 2017, that's 11 years, I worked for 2 of the 5 largest accounting firms in the world. One, Deloitte, is the largest accounting firm in the world. The second, BDO, is the 5th largest accounting firm in the world. In those organizations, I led the Department of Justice consulting account at Deloitte and did a lot of consulting with law enforcement, intel, and counterterrorism organizations, FBI, ATF, some of the DHS components, and did a lot of, here's what I did and here's what we did successfully, here's what you can do as an organization, still in the shadows of 9/11 and still trying to improve information sharing, a new world of cyber threat, intelligence analysis, which is very, very relevant to your school and what's going on here. And also just general leadership consulting around how to lead organizations through traumatic times, changing times, transformative times, how to move a workforce in a direction that maybe they don't want to go, what's involved with that, how do you motivate people, et cetera. So I had a great run, 11 years, still connected to the law enforcement community, still, in my view, contributing to the law enforcement community, but in a much different way than when I was the director of NCIS and working investigations as an agent, and then prior to that as a police officer. Spent a couple minutes talking about where I am now, because it all ties together. And you all may not know this. In Washington, D.C., there's a memorial wall. There's a Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall, which I'm sure most of you are aware of. There's a law enforcement memorial wall that's at 4th and E. It's Judiciary Square, for any of you who are familiar with D.C. It sits in the middle of the touristy area, the monument area, if you will, near the National Building Museum. And this memorial was built land was donated in 1984. In 1991, the first name of a police officer giving his life in the line of duty was inscribed on that wall. 227 years ago, we've documented that 1791, the first year a police officer in serving this country died in line of duty. That person's name is on the wall. In 1991, the effort to put all of those who've died in the line of duty on the wall began. Today, there are 21,183 names on the wall of law enforcement professionals who've given their lives in the line of duty in our history as we can document. This year, 129 additional names will go on that wall killed in the line of duty this year, and approximately 210 additional names will go on the wall of those dying from recovery efforts post 9/11, from cancer-related deaths, and also historical names that were killed in the line of duty that we've just now been able to document the facts around those deaths. So that wall has been there, and it's a monument, a memorial to the law enforcement professionals who've died in the line of duty for 27 years. And it speaks for itself. Unfortunately, their names probably continue to be added to that wall every year. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of that element of our mission. The new element, which I want to talk about, is the National Law Enforcement Museum. I'm going to show you a very short clip at the end of my remarks. But the short version is, the reason I assumed the job is because I think law enforcement, which some of you are involved in or hope to get involved in or will certainly be aware of, touches every one of the citizens in this country on a daily basis. Everyone in some way, shape, or form, whether you get a speeding ticket leaving here today, whether you go to your apartment and it's been broken into, whether you read something in the newspaper that happened somewhere else in the world, law enforcement as a profession touches every element of our society, every one of our citizens, and is a key reason, probably the key reason, we are all able to enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy and the life which we can pursue of really happiness and good careers and families, etc. This museum, which will be, give you a little couple facts, 60,000 square feet, 3 stories underground. We hope to get 450 to 500,000 visitors a year. There's no precedent, there's nothing like it. The facility is going to be a beautiful facility. It's going to be a go-to location for people visiting D.C. We're going to have 20,000 artifacts. I won't mention all 20,000. Things like Elliot Ness's credentials, the first federal agent. We have J. Edgar Hoover Foundation's office, all his office articles, his desk, and his notes and stuff he did. We've got the first bonnet, quote unquote, worn by the first police woman. We've got Al Capone's vest that he had on when he was killed. So we have a lot of old stuff. Kind of fits my personality. Kind of old stuff. If you're into artifacts, you'll enjoy it. We have a lot of diverse, unique things. We have the helicopter literally the helicopter that was used in the rescue of the Air Florida crash, 1992, where the Air Florida plane crashed in the 14th Street Bridge with the helicopter that the pilot hovered over the near drowning victims, and people rappelled down and picked them out of the water. We have that helicopter. We have the vehicle. You guys will remember the D.C. sniper case where the guy spent weeks terrorizing the city, 2 people, and ended up killing several people. We have the car that was used and all the evidence from that case. So we have a lot of artifacts that will be unique, and excitedly, just found this out Thursday, we have a fully decked out police car. Most people, unless you've been in the back seat of one, no one here of course has been, or in the front seat driving it, don't really know what's in a police car these days. The computerized, the modern, the equipment, they're neat. So we have a fully decked out police car that's been donated by Fiat Chrysler. And because it's going to be a Chrysler, the colors of the police car, which has been a state of great discussion, are going to be of Indiana State Police. Anybody want to know why? Well, because Indiana State Police is the first law enforcement agency that put Dodge Chargers on the road. I never knew that. And because Dodge is sponsoring the car, they thought it would be neat to use the colors of the first department that was on the road driving their cars as patrol cars. So that's kind of neat. So Indiana will get some immediate coverage because the Indiana State Police emblem and the colors are going to be right there in the middle of the museum. So there's going to be a lot of neat stuff for people to see, unique stuff, sort of a walk in the history of law enforcement. More exciting, two other elements, and then I'll open for questions. The museum is going to, it will make those who serve or have served in law enforcement proud. They will appreciate how their history is reflected and what they've done. For those who don't know much about law enforcement and understand the complexities of the profession, it's not an easy profession. It's not a black and white, yes and no, every decision is clear profession. The intent of the museum is to inform the individuals who come there and are served by law enforcement that those in law enforcement, however they serve, whether they're uniformed detectives, analysts, forensic specialists, corrections folks, we have a corrections exhibit in there. It's a complicated profession. It's a profession of service, and it's a profession that the public needs to understand and appreciate that every day is an opportunity to do better. But there will also be mistakes, challenges, and problems every day. And for the third category of person we hope to visit, and what I'm most excited about, is the opportunity to impact. Impact what's going on today, what you read in the papers, the instant finger pointing when something goes bad, whose fault was it, the whole chain of events that started in Ferguson that really changed the way law enforcement should and have viewed themselves. And the reason I'm saying that is law enforcement, to be successful in the future and contribute to the safety and security of the citizens, which is law enforcement's mission, has to engage in communities, has to be part of communities, have to be part of community alliances, community outreach. The community has to understand and embrace and be part of the effort of law enforcement to serve our citizens. So the third category of individual we hope to attend, visit, walk in the shoes of a law enforcement professional are the skeptics, those who are critics, those who don't know much more than what they've read or heard, and they may lean towards law enforcement's bad, law enforcement is corrupt, law enforcement is this, that, and the other. We invite and hope that those folks, those citizens, will join us for dialogue, for information, for discussion, and understand it's not an easy profession, and it's not going to get any easier. It was a hell of a lot easier when I was a cop in Miami than it is today. So we hope to engage and really partner, not so much with law enforcement, because law enforcement is going to be represented in this museum, but with communities, kids in particular, youngsters, middle school, high school, college age kids and young adults and adults who may know of law enforcement from the distance or may form an impression that's based on an experience or two, but may not fully appreciate, again, what the life of a law enforcement professional involves. So I'm excited. I assumed the job in June. The museum's going to open in October of this year. I'm excited about the opportunity we have to impact the profession. And I'll give you one quick example. There's a young lady who works for me now. She has a master's degree in museum studies. She went to college in Minnesota. She joined the museum probably about the same time I did. She's been there about 6 months. And I'm just chatting with her one day. And I said, do you have any family in law enforcement? Nope. Do you have any history with law enforcement? Nope. I got a ticket on campus for speeding. Well, what do you think about law enforcement? Nothing. I don't really think anything about law enforcement. I'm a museum studies major, and I'm going to be working with the curator of the museum, really putting the artifacts together, putting the exhibits together, but I don't really think about law enforcement. And I said, well, if I say to you, tell me what comes to you, when I say to you law enforcement, what do you think? And her immediate response was racial profiling. Immediate. And I said, well, where did that come from? Why do you say that? And she said, that's all I really hear. That's all I know. I'm on a college campus. I've been there for 5 years. I see what's in the news. I see what and hear what's being portrayed. So it worries me that that's what I think. I don't really know if it's true or not because I haven't experienced it. I haven't witnessed it. But you ask me what I think, that's what I think. So to me, my reaction to that is, in a different role, this museum offers us collectively an opportunity to impact that, to address that, to talk about that, to not deny that that hasn't and probably doesn't still exist in some law enforcement aspects of our society, but what do we do to improve? How do we engage the communities? How do we learn from what we've done in the past? So we will have dialogue around constant dialogue and programs around not only historic events, civil rights era, drug war era, organized crime era, Ferguson, what Ferguson actually did and impacted this country, how that city has changed, how law enforcement has changed, what continues today in terms of the service aspect of law enforcement, the enforcement aspect of law enforcement, and the community need to connect to law enforcement. We hope to have a lot of provocative, thought-producing programs where we'll bring different perspectives, different points of view into the museum as a platform to talk about the aspect of law enforcement that impacts each of you as citizens and how we can make that as strong as it can possibly be in terms of service and support in the future. So I would invite you, may even be able to figure out a student discount because it is a pay as you visit, but we'll figure out some way to give you a student discount. And get there, come visit, come track our programs, and come see your Indiana State Police car sitting there. And with that, I'm going to show you a video at the end, 3 minutes, but I want to leave 15, 20 minutes for questions, assuming that this group is going to have a lot of questions. And if you don't, I'll just go back and tell some more war stories. That's okay. So who wants to ask me a question? Somebody. Come on. Yes, sir.
What kind of work did you have with the ATF and how involved were you in your work with the NCIS?
Well, we work, NCIS is a small agency with a huge and broad mission. So I had an offer to go work with DEA concurrent when I went to NCIS many, many years ago. The reason I didn't, and Secret Service, the reason I didn't go to either of those agencies was because of the NCIS mission. So in the course of my career, as well as any NCIS person, I spent a lot of time working drug investigations. I spent a lot of time doing protective service support to Secret Service. And we had numerous opportunities to be part of joint task forces with ATF. So NCIS as an agency, probably more than any other federal agency, because of the size and the mission and the jurisdiction, works with every federal agency, both intel and law enforcement on a regular basis, and every state and local agency, drug task forces, violent crime task forces, child sexual predator task forces, a lot of stuff. So in my NCIS career, on a street level, I worked with ATF a lot. As I became an executive, we, particularly post 9/11, all the heads of federal agencies, you find this interesting, didn't really know that much about each other. Everybody stays in their own lane at the executive level. Post 9/11, there was a tremendous move to integrate in terms of priorities, information sharing, and what each organization brings to the table much, much, much more aggressively that I think still holds true today. So I spent a lot of time with ATF leadership during those years. And very good agency, do some phenomenal things. They do more, I would say, hardcore, undercover, gang-related work, obviously weapon, explosives-related undercover work than any agency. Then they're very good at what they do. Other questions? Yes?
How did your time as a police officer prepare you for the remaining career as special agent?
I'll tell you what, I would tell you individually, as any career you're going into, there's a technical aspect of law enforcement, the forensic aspect. So if your goal in any career is a very technical, almost a very individual part where you have such deep knowledge on in the criminal world, whether it's fingerprinting or blood splatters or DNA, or in the cyber world, very specifically technical, there is a technical part of the law enforcement intel community. But the key ingredient, in my opinion, for success, quite frankly, are your people skills. Because whatever element of law enforcement or corrections you perhaps pursue a career within, it's your ability to interact with different levels of citizens, different levels of peers, different representatives of organizations you'll work with, and obviously victims, suspects, witnesses. And your success as an investigator or a police officer, in my opinion, is less so on your physical skills, your technical skills, although they're important. It's more on your ability to relate to people. And you're interested in literally helping people and taking what's sometimes a horrible situation or a tragic situation or a unresolvable situation and working through that as best you can to get to a resolution that is as good as you can do. So police officers, you hear this all the time. There's approximately 1 million police officers. Think about that. And that's scattered over about 18,000 individual police agencies in this country. Think of it as a university system. I don't know how many school universities there are, but Indiana State, Indiana University, and Ball State, and Butler all probably do things a little differently. Faculty's probably different, your disciplines are different, the opportunities are different. Think of 18,000 police departments and federal agencies, all different. Similar mission, but all different, serving a different portion of the population, different cultures. They all bring their own culture, like I'm sure you have your own culture compared to Indiana University. The reason I'm mentioning that, and there's 1 million law enforcement at any one time interacting with the public in some form on a daily basis. And if you just take that each person connected with law enforcement out of that 1 million probably has 2 or 3 interactions a day. That's 3 to 4 million personal touches, law enforcement to citizen. How many do you read about? How many do you hear about? Now, the ones you do read and hear about are many times tragic, and they're many times either heroic or tragic. And you're many times getting the anomaly of what the millions of interactions that go on daily in serving us as citizens reflect. So my point there is, you as a law enforcement professional or someone associated with that profession, most of your career is going to be interacting in some way with your fellow citizens. And most of it, believe it or not, is not going to be putting someone in jail, is not going to be executing a search warrant, is not going to be firing a shot. Most of it's going to be working day in and day out, literally, to make your lives better. So part of what, getting back to the museum, and part of what my satisfaction as a law enforcement career brought was being able to do that. And, make no mistake, crime's crime. And there's some really, the opioid crisis itself is a challenge for this country that involves law enforcement in a way that many times, I'm sure you all have had some discussions, law enforcement doesn't quite know how to deal with it. So as things happen in our culture, law enforcement is right in the middle of it. So their ability to be almost a health care provider to a person who's overdosed, an enforcement person to a dealer, a sympathetic a sympathetic listener to someone who's suffered a tragic loss. If you put all that stuff together, that police officer is put in a scenario many times where he or she is playing multiple roles at once, and it isn't easy. And many times what you'll see is the police officer is the most visible form of really just, I got to lash out, or I got to express my unhappiness, or I got to find somebody to blame. Well, that police officer is constantly a symbol of something, in some cases, that's gone bad, and in some cases that's been tragic, and he or she's got to deal with a lot of stuff. One of the things I'm forming for my museum is an advisory board to look at law enforcement issues. Community leaders, I want on that board. Community activists, I want on that board. Law enforcement leaders, historians, and actually, interestingly enough, which I wouldn't have thought of, representatives from the medical profession, I want on that board, because law enforcement professionals either deal with or experience themselves suicide, depression, heart attack rate among law enforcement is very high. So you've got this, not only the individual, but the citizenry that law enforcement serves. You're dealing with a whole bunch of stuff that over time can take its toll. So we want to be part of dialogue on how to at least talk about and address those kinds of really national issues that we think we can impact through some discussion and representation in the museum. That's a long answer to that. I don't even remember what you said. No, I do, I'm kidding. Police officer versus agent. Ability to deal with people is a core. Someone else had a question, I think. I saw a hand go up. No? Anything else, anybody? Okay, I will tell you this in a couple finishing minutes. I kind of made reference to it. I had a phenomenal career. I had opportunity to work with levels of leadership, decision makers that I would never have imagined. I led a phenomenal organization that really does impact, do good work. They continue to do good work. Wouldn't turn it back at all. Give great credit to this university and the Criminology program for helping me start on that journey. The law enforcement profession is a phenomenal opportunity for anyone in whatever area you might have interest in, be it, again, the forensic side, the technical side, the psychological side. I mean, forensic psychologists and profilers are big these days. The analytical side, as this university's leading. The cyber side, corrections, big opportunity as well in support to how transformation's taking place in how offenders are being dealt with and how they should be dealt with and how we can do that better. So I appreciate your interest as individuals and wish you all the best in the future. If there's anything I can ever do, I go back to what I said at the start. Take advantage of those who are here, your faculty. Take advantage of those who've come before you. And seek people out who are in some way connected to where you may want to go career-wise. Because as I said, as we get older, we all like to talk a lot of what we've done, and we've learned a lot. There's things I did as head of an agency I regret. Things I could have done, there's things I would have done differently looking back. And we all have those moments of insight that for those of you whose careers are ahead of you, take advantage of those. And people are usually much more willing to share their imperfections when they get older than maybe when they're still coming up through the chain of what they think they have to do everything right. Anybody else have any questions as this is coming on? All right. I was hoping somebody asked me something controversial. I love controversy. Yeah, controversy.
What are some major changes to law enforcement today that differentiate from back then that where you're going?
That's a great question, and I think you see it you'll see it in anything you do. I think it's hugely important for law enforcement, whatever it takes, to get involved in communities. Have to get involved in communities. I spoke to a group of educators, middle school teachers, and they were from pretty tough areas. A lot of kids from homes were struggling and they didn't have really good role models. They'd had issues even in their, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade years. And one of the educators said is, my kids, we don't teach law enforcement. We don't teach anything. We don't even talk about it. So when something happens in the news and there's a bad shooting, police are involved and there's accusations one way or the other of what happened, there's no dialogue in school about that. The kids don't have any perspective to, understand or form an opinion or get to the factual set of circumstances that occurred. So one element is there's got to be greater outreach at the early levels in our educational system, where kids get an appreciation for the importance of criminal justice, the importance of law enforcement, and understand it ain't perfect and things got to change in certain areas, but it is, it's a fabric, a piece of fabric that holds all of us together. Secondly, and I think you guys see this all the time, training, and when I trained, 40 some years ago, training certainly much more sophisticated, much more technical, but back to the answer to the young lady there, training around how you deal with people, how you diffuse situations, how you take where you've grown up and you're now policing an area that is not where you grew up. How do you put those worlds together and be effective and fair? Those discussions are going on all the time. I'm working now with a sociologist at the University of Maryland who's doing a study with a major police department, and the study is around, and it's very interesting. She's working with the entire police department, and her thesis is we all have, each of us in this room, you in this room, have an inherent bias on something. We're born that way, we grow up that way, we all have an inherent bias of some type. She's working with the police department to have the police officers understand where that inherent bias is. Is it a racial bias? Is it an ethnic bias? Is it a sexual bias? Where is it? Because if you don't acknowledge that, and you're a police officer that's your mission is to serve and protect, if you don't acknowledge where that bias is, and all of us can't, then it'll show up. You won't necessarily even realize it, but it'll be reflected in how you deal with the situation. So it's a fascinating, from an academic perspective, and I happen to agree with that, to answer your point, not only is the profession complex, the technical profession, but our society is complex. So dealing with people that either need your help, are hurt, are committing a crime, and supporting that community takes a different approach, and it takes smart problem solvers, empathetic, who can also be disciplined when they need to be. So it's a tough profession, and I think we're just touching the surface based on events of the last decade, how policing needs to evolve in the future. And in a way, it's exciting because a lot of leadership, current leadership recognizes that and says, look, the next generation, of police officers, law enforcement professionals, to be trained differently a little bit, still going to have the same kind of tactical skills, train differently, understand the population that we serve and what's the most effective way in serving that population. That's an exciting part of what's going on right now. So that was a good question. And been a pleasure talking with you. Any other questions? Any comments at all? Thank you all very much. Thank you, Dr. Woods, Travis, for having me here. Good luck.